Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this AHDB Strategic Farm event featuring our strategic farmer, Mark Jelley. My name is Sarah Pick, and I look after the strategic farms as part of my work in the Knowledge Exchange team for beef and lamb. Tonight's webinar is focusing on replacement heifers, and we have a great lineup of speakers for you to listen to this evening. They include Mark Jelley, our strategic farmer, who will be providing us with an overview of his farm and his heifer replacement policy. And we also have Joe Henry, who is a farm vet working at Black Sheep Farm Health in Northumberland. Joe has a particular interest in cattle fertility and also has a farm of his own, so he certainly knows his stuff. Finally, I'm also joined by my colleague Emma Steele, who will be our question master for this evening. But before we hear from our speakers, I just want to run through the technology so that you know how to ask any questions. So if you can't see the question box at the moment, you need to click on this orange arrow here, which essentially is a minimize button. Click on that arrow and it will expand your toolbar options. You then want to scroll down to the question box here, click on that little arrow there, and that will enable you to type your question in, and then remember to press send. Emma will then read out your questions. We'll have regular question breaks throughout the webinar, so please do keep sending your questions in, and Emma will make sure she asks them at an appropriate time. And remember, there are no silly questions. So the agenda for this evening, like I say, Mark Jelley will give us an introduction to his farm, Perkins Lodge. We'll then move on to talking about the advantages and disadvantages of buying in heifers, and then we'll move on to talk about breeding our own replacements. We'll aim to finish the webinar no later than 8:30. So it's my pleasure to introduce our strategic farmer, Mark Jelley. Mark farms alongside his family in Long Buckby, Northamptonshire, and joined the Strategic Farm Programme in 2017. Since becoming involved in the project, Mark has made a number of changes to his business, including implementing rotational grazing, changing finishing rations, and more recently, changing his replacement heifer policy, which we'll hear a lot more about later on. So Mark, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Would you just start by introducing your farm?
Yeah, sure. Hi everybody. Thanks, Sarah. So we farm in Northamptonshire. You can see from the picture that we've got a mixed farm. We've got arable and we've got livestock on about 500 acres, split roughly half and half between grass and arable. The arable unit provides the bedding for the cattle, and then the cattle basically give the muck back to the arable unit. It works quite well. It's a traditional mixed farm, really, and has been for a very long time. So I farm in partnership with my father. There are two of us on the farm, and we run a herd of roughly 90 suckler cows on the farm. We calve in the spring, aiming to calve beginning of March, and then we wean everything in the autumn, and we take them through to finish, and then sell direct to abattoirs. So the male cattle are being finished as bulls, so they're finished intensively on cereals indoors and go to ABP. The heifers, up until recently, have been going to either ABP or a local catering butcher. And obviously with the problems with COVID at the moment, the catering trade has collapsed rather spectacularly. So the 95 cows, sorry, go on, sorry.
I was going to say, and what age are they finished at, Mark?
Okay, bulls have to be finished by 16 months old. We're aiming to finish them nearer 14 months. And there is a top weight of 420 kilos at the moment on those ABP. And heifers, we're aiming to finish those somewhere around about anywhere between 16 and 24 months.
Okay, brilliant. And one of the things you've changed as part of being involved in the Strategic Farm Programme is you've implemented rotational grazing. Do you want to just talk about that?
Not really. I'm really rubbish at it. Yeah. I mean, we've got quite a dry farm. We have a lot of ridge and furrow, as you can see. We've struggled quite a lot with reseeding that and actually creating really productive swards. The flat land tends to be arable land. The ridge and furrow land tends to be grassland. We can reseed and we can establish in a good year, and then you get a very dry year. The ridges burn off and you lose half of your grazing area, and so on. What we have found is rotational grazing versus set stocking, which was our traditional policy, has improved the grass utilisation massively, and it's also actually grown a lot more grass as well. We've found now with a couple of very dry summers that we've been able to graze through those summers relatively successfully, and it's also made us more aware of the grazing situation as well, which I think has also helped then with weaning weights and also helped with conception rates and things like that as well. So we're not great at it. I'm not for a minute going to pretend that we're any good at what we're doing, but it's definitely a step forward from the set stocking regime that we've used in the past.
That's it. You're having a go and learning, aren't you, as you go along? Brilliant. And what labour do you have on the farm?
Me and my father. My mum helps out during calving quite a bit as well, and there's we have some part-time help in occasionally as well, but it's very much at the moment the two of us, and you know, it keeps the labour costs down, obviously, but at the same time it does put a lot of pressure on us as individuals to keep the show on the road, really.
Yeah, brilliant. And just going back to the cattle then, do you just want to talk about what breeds you have on the farm?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I joined the Strategic Farm Programme in 2017, as you said, and prior to that, we'd run a flying herd of Hereford Friesian cows with blonde Aquitaine bulls. So we're producing very heavy carcasses and doing very well on the Europe grid, which worked very well for deadweight sales. And we were buying in between 20 and 25 replacement heifers every year, and we would use that as a management tool. So we would buy in more heifers than we needed, and it would enable us to keep the calving pattern nice and tight by culling the back end of the calving pattern at scanning in the autumn, and it also enabled us to cull animals which didn't fit the system. 2017 we were hit with TB, and we lost over the course of 18 months around about a third of the, or the equivalent of a third of the breeding cows on the farm. So we lost 28 cows directly, and then we've had some other issues which have gone alongside that, which have influenced, also affected us. So TB was a really nasty surprise when it arrived. We still don't know where it came from. There were no lesions visible in any cattle, so I can't say we bought it in. I can't say it's my local badgers. I can't say it's my local deer or anything else. What I do know is I had TB and it was bad. What became clear was we've got to look at our replacement strategy and try and find a way to manage ourselves through that, because relying on being able to buy cattle when you were closed down was impossible. And also the safety of the animals we were buying in obviously could have been an issue as well. So from that point of view, we were just beginning, before TB arrived, to really start thinking about the biosecurity within the herd, and also the ability to buy the cattle that we wanted to buy, which was becoming more difficult. But we were really also forced into it by our experiences with TB, which I wouldn't wish on anybody.
No, and I think at this point I'll just bring Joe in. So just touching on TB, Joe, what are the recommendations from the vets?
Well, it depends very much in the area of the country you're in, but like up here, most of our practice is in 48 months, just testing every 4 years, and our recommendation is basically try to avoid buying in cattle from below Hadrian's Wall. I think that's you know, obviously we don't have it. It's not in our wildlife, and its badgers aren't going to bring it from Cornwall to Northumberland, but perhaps cattle movements might. So, but I think know where. I think the critical thing is know where you're buying from and what their status is. Obviously, they'll have to, if you're in a 1 year or 2 year testing parish, then they'll have to be pre-movement tested and then ideally kept isolated and then tested within 60 or 120 days after arrival for a post-movement test. So they're tested twice, but no test is 100%.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, thanks, Joe. So I think we'll leave the heifers there. The last thing I just wanted to touch on at this point in time was the other changes that you've made through the Strategic Farm Programme. And one of those, which is quite good, is tweaking your finishing rations. Do you just want to talk a little bit about that and the results that you've got? And then we'll move on to focusing particularly on your heifer replacement policy.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, the finishing rations on in our herd were based around effectively mill waste. We're fortunate in Northamptonshire that we've got a lot of big producers or users of cereals. So there's the likes of Haygarts and Weetabix and people like that. So there was a lot of waste material available from those mills at relatively low prices. And indeed, at one point we were paying £60 a tonne for a ration, which was a cooked ration, and worked brilliantly for finishing cattle. The model we ran previously was based on an ADAS model, and the feeding regime fitted that really, really well. As feed prices have gone up and the mills become more aware of the value of what they're actually rejecting and clearing out, obviously the cost has increased quite significantly. So we're now in a situation where we've tweaked our ration slightly, or quite considerably. So we're using urea-treated wheat and barley. The last 12 months we've used a urea treatment on the barley, and that was after we discovered that the malting barley, which we would normally expect to produce on the farm, hadn't met specification. So rather than have that barley leave the farm, we urea treated it, and we've been feeding that alongside untreated rolled barley as a sort of 50-50 mix. And the results have been really, really good. I noticed last week there was an article in Farmers Weekly quite critical of urea treatment of wheat, though. So it looks like we might be changing it again this coming week or this coming winter. But no, it's the most valuable aspect actually has been using a nutritionist to check the ration that we are feeding, and certainly to look at the heifer rations and move them away from cereals towards a more grass-based diet. We're able to grow very good arable crops on the farm, and therefore in theory we ought to be able to grow half decent silage crops. The only limiting factor really is me. So once we master that, then we should be away. But you know, it's a learning curve. It's always a learning curve. The mistakes, I like mistakes that we make because we learn from them, and
that's it.
You know, for well, we've made a lot of them, so we're learning as we go.
And just so our listeners are aware, what daily live weight gains are you achieving from the new ration?
Finishing bulls at the moment are doing over 2 kilos a head as an average.
Wow,
a day.
Brilliant.
It's not for everybody. It's a system that works for us. It gets rid of the male animals in a way which we're able to make economic sense from. But in a different part of the country, in a different system, it might be different.
That's it. That's it. So before we move on to focus specifically on heifers, can I just check, Emma, are there any questions on Mark's farm?
Yeah, we've got a quick one come through for you, Mark. What level of nitrogen do you apply to the rig and furrow grazing land?
Not a lot. That may or may not be useful or helpful. I don't know. We're probably running at somewhere in the region of I don't know, 50, 60 kilos a hectare as an average every year. It's become increasingly obvious actually that with our cows, the benefit is having volume of forage in front of them rather than necessarily quality. And I know that goes a little bit against some of the stuff that goes with rotational grazing, but we have found that if we can grow a lot of early grass and almost use it as a standing hay crop if we get a bad year, that works really, really well. Especially as we can, once the cows are fence trained, we can then strip graze that a couple of yards a day, and the cows respond really, really well to it, and that really helped us through the drought a couple of years ago. I mean, this year at the moment, looking around the farm, we've got 30 kilos of nitrogen per hectare on the ground across all of the grazing land, and I can't find any grass, even stuff that hasn't been grazed yet this season, that's above toe height. It's ridiculous. We're still having frosts. We've got no real sunshine to speak of, and it looks like this year is going to be a real challenge for us. So we're not using a huge amount of fertilizer on the grassland, rightly or wrongly. The ridge and furrow, when we've successfully reseeded it in the past, we've found that it reverts back to native grasses and native clovers very, very quickly. We seem to have a good seed bank of stuff that we don't want. And yeah, it's one of the joys of farming a very traditional type of pasture, I guess. I wouldn't change it. I like the fact that we've got it and that we're grazing it, but it does bring its own unique challenges.
And another grassland one for you. How long do you graze or rest your paddocks in the rotation?
At the moment, we're on 2 or 3 day moves. Once we get into the rotation, at the moment, in fact, this year we haven't started a rotation. There's no point. There isn't any grass to rotate into. So at the moment, since calving, we calve in the spring, starting this year on about, I think, the 22nd of February from memory, and everything is outdoors within 24 hours, 48 hours. We don't hold anything indoors, but we have more grass at that point than we've got now. So all the cows at the moment are stopped, and we're supplementary feeding. It's the only way we can make any sense of the grazing situation at the moment, because we need to build a buffer of grass in front of them before we move forwards. And that's been one of the big learning curves actually with rotational grazing. It's when you can see grass in front of you, not walking into it, if you can see that you're not actually going to have something at the end of it. Because if we go and wipe the whole farm out now down to, so there's nothing left, when the weather does warm up and we get a little bit of rain, the response is going to be so slow. So we're trying to build that grass wedge in front of ourselves, and at the moment failing miserably, but we are feeding hay and mainly straw actually to the cows. But it's a challenging year, to be honest.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Emma. So before we move on to talk about heifers, I just thought it'd be really useful just to get some feedback from yourselves. So Emma, can we run the poll? And listeners, please can you let us know if you're buying in heifers or you're breeding your own? And once that's come in, Emma, would you be able to let us know what the results are?
Yep, so it's on the screen now that you should be able to touch, and it's what is your heifer replacement strategy? Do you buy heifers in, breed your own heifers, or both, and you just select one of these? And we've got about 50% have voted so far. So if you haven't voted yet, please get clicking your buttons. Right, we're at about 70%. So
Brilliant.
I'm going to close it now. So anybody just quickly get in if you haven't already. But I will just talk through the results of that. So we've got 13% are buying heifers in, 60% breeding your own, and 27% doing both.
Okay, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. So most of you are breeding your own heifers, which we will touch on in a minute or two. Okay, so now we've got the basics of Mark's suckler herd. We're going to delve deeper into his heifer replacement policy. So this is one of your typical bought-in heifers, is it, Mark?
Yeah, I mean that's probably a 2-year-old, a second calve or something like that. But that is a Heifer Frisian, which everybody obviously will recognise, and yeah, with a blonde Aquitaine bull in the background, which is the father of the calf that's in the picture. So yeah. That is very typical of what we were running before. We've still got a few of those cows kicking around in the herd at the moment, and the blonde bull is still with us for this season and probably leaving at the end of this season.
Okay, and why did that system work well for you?
Well, the ADAS model was built on the idea that there were a lot of cheap, unwanted, if you like, dairy heifer beef cross calves available back in the 90s, which were ideal suckler mothers, and they were. They were British Frisian cross Hereford, and that cow would perhaps be typical of the kind of animal we were looking for. They produced a calf which can hit a 400 kilo, excuse me, a 400 kilo dead carcass quite comfortably as a bull. Heifers will hit between 320 and 360 depending on the finishing regime as well. So plenty of weight in the carcasses, quite lean beef, grading well on the Europe grid, and the replacements were as cheap to buy in as we were achieving as cull values. So we were able to manipulate the replacement policy to basically just swap cows around with heifers as and when the opportunity arose. So hence we'd buy in more heifers than we needed and take the opportunity to get rid of cows with large udders, poor feet, temperament issues, or whatever else we might have encountered along the way.
Yeah, and so on average then, how long did these cows last?
I haven't got an exact figure for it. I would guess 5 years or 5 calvings within the herd, but there was a massive variation. And what we would find was that we'd have some cows that would get up to into double figures with the number of calves they'd have, and quite often you'd have a farm full of those cows. So obviously there was a good farm with good genetics in there, good longevity. And other times you'd have a group come in which would have a lot shorter life, and they might only be on the farm for 1 or 2 calvings. And because we were buying through a dealer and we were buying a variety of cattle, you'd get 25 animals that might be coming off 5 or 6 farms, and it was luck of the draw what lasted and what didn't really. But I would guess as an average probably 5 calvings.
Okay, brilliant. And at what age were these heifers calving at?
We had no control over it really, anything between 23 months and up to probably 36 months, because the animals that came in would be a variety of ages because they were coming from a variety of sources. In that system as a flying herd, it didn't really matter too much because, as I say, we were manipulating the calving pattern so heavily and manipulating the performance of the cattle so much that the age at calving wasn't as important as it's become with the idea of breeding our own replacements.
It's quite, from a logistics point of view, quite easy in that the bull can go with any of the cattle any year. You know, if a bull goes lame, you just swap the next bull in. You don't have any problems with you know, everything's going to terminal sire, buying everything in. It's
yeah, there wasn't any, exactly, Joe. There wasn't any real complications behind the thinking process. It was buy the best bulls that we could get hold of for the job, and you know, they would go to the cows. We would rotate the bulls around the calving or the bulling groups to ensure that if we got any fertility issues that we were covering it that way, and it didn't cause any problems at all in that sense. And you know, the blonde bull is a great terminal sire, or was a great terminal sire, and it worked really, really well. It wasn't a great breeding animal. Occasionally we get the bull where it would catch a young heifer at grass, and you'd get a calf that was being born with to a very, very young heifer, and they were terrible mums. So there was no incentive to keep our own replacements from the herd. It just didn't make any sense.
And Joe, when you're buying in heifers, what are the things you should be looking for?
I mean, from disease status, I think is pretty much paramount, obviously, vet-wise, and you know, there's a number of health schemes accredited by Czechs, Premium Cattle Health Scheme, or Axiom do one, or High Health by BioBest. Really, Yonis would be pretty near the top of the list. You want to be buying off someone that's testing for Yonis, ideally risk level 1 or 2, to minimise the chance of buying that in. BVD, obviously, most of Europe are BVD. You can't sell unless you know the status of your animal. We're not like that yet in England, but buy from Scotland, definitely it is. But you should be checking BVD status. You don't want to buy in a PI, that can be disastrous. And I certainly have known it in the past that people have bought a bunch of heifers to bull, and it turns out one of them calved after 5 months, and it was already in calf when it arrived, and it met BVD at that critical stage, probably in the mart, and it produced a PI, and that was a real disaster for that herd, in that it had been BVD free, and then they had BVD ripped through the herd, and the farmer put a third less calves, weaned a third less calves that year.
Really?
The combination between infertility, abortion, calf scours, calf pneumonia, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, it's pretty important to check that you're not buying in BVD, and obviously to vaccinate. I think all cows should be vaccinated for BVD. If you don't have BVD, it's a cheap insurance, and if you do, it will minimise the risks. Lepto, IBR, all the other things on the health scheme. Probably not quite as
what,
critical, and there's good vaccines for them.
yeah, and what about Campylobacter?
So yeah, Campylobacter is really quite important and very underdiagnosed because it's tricky to test for. But the best way of minimising that is to only buy virgin animals, because it's a venereal disease. Campylobacter fetus, as we're talking about, which is basically causes barren cows and abortions, and it's carried on non-virgin, either in the cow's reproductive vagina or the bull's pizzle.
Okay.
And so if you buy, yeah, so if you buy virgins, you won't buy that in. But if you have that, you'll definitely not be hitting your fertility straps. You know, you'll be looking at third of your cows gelled.
And are all the health standards and the schemes, are they all kind of at the same level? Are they all testing for the same thing? And
yeah, so all the schemes that are part of checks, the Cattle Health Initiative, then yeah, whether you're premium cattle health scheme or high health, you know, the standards are the same. They're all accredited by checks. So
okay.
yeah.
And
the other
if you
thing
just
to watch for buying in, like, because every time you buy in an animal, there's a chance of buying in disease with it. You know, the animals are Trojan horses for diseases, basically, and the list goes on. And you know, from buying on having a dead calf, and you get a set-on calf, and it brings salmonella on, and that rips through all your calves, and you get calf scars and death that way. So yeah, there's lots of things to be thinking about when you're buying on, and obviously TB, which we've already talked about.
yeah. So is quarantining worthwhile? So if you're buying in some animals, how long would you say they need to be quarantined for?
Quarantine's really pretty essential, because it gives you an idea to either get your tests back to see what is there, and also to allow your treatments to work. So you might want to be using white wormer on them, so you're not bringing on pour-on wormer resistant, which are really prevalent. The pour-ons are used very widely in the cattle industry, and so a lot of farms have got resistance to those chemicals.
Oh,
so,
right.
so you give them a different class of chemical and stick them in a shed for a few days, and that helps reduce anthelmintic resistance being spread around the country. And the same with fluke.
Yeah. And is there a way to test for that anthelmintic resistance?
There is, but it's not easy, because you have to have a decent level of worms in the first place. So say you're buying on heifers that have only got putting out 200 eggs per gram, and you worm them with a pour-on wormer. If it's 70% effective, that 200 will go to zero, and you'll think that's fine. But actually, if the worms were at 1,000 eggs per gram, and you were still then left with 300 eggs per gram after a wormer, you'd realise you had a problem. But because you can't pick up just sort of 50 eggs per gram very easily, it's much harder to check. And clearly, people aren't going to be putting stock for sale that's really wormy, you know, because they don't look right. So I think it's almost assume that you're buying in stuff with resistant worms, and put treatment protocols with your vet as you know, to do with the cow's cattle sustainable worm control policy, and fluke.
Yeah. So
and
just going back then,
the mange that they have, you know, that can spread ectoparasites as well.
Yeah. So just going back to what you're saying then about maiden animals, I know it used to be that, you know, you'd let a bull serve a few cows and then you could sell him as a fertile bull. Are you saying then it's much better to get for them to have had him semen tested and use those?
Yeah, absolutely. You really want to avoid buying non-virgins from the Campylobacter risk point of view. So yeah, I believe all bulls should have a pre-breeding exam, ideally done by the vendor, the seller, and then there's no sort of grey areas, because it's the seller isn't, you know, the vendor, he could sell a bull to someone, he doesn't know what the disease status of that farm is, and if that bull catches BVD, it might make him infertile for 12 weeks. But that isn't the seller's point of view, and the guy who buys him will say, oh, cows aren't being stopped, they're coming back. And it's not actually, whereas if the if the vendor can then say, well, you know, he's certainly on this date he was firing well. It's not a measure of libido, obviously. He's also will put the semen in there. But it's a measure of how good his locomotion is, his feet as well as his semen.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. And so if we're looking at buying females, then is it better? Is there any risks with buying in calf heifers or cows at foot rather than maiden?
Yeah, because like for instance, you know, the BVD thought, do you know if it was vaccinated with BVD before it became pregnant or not? Yeah, so I think it's much better to buy maiden heifers rather than there's just less diseases. You know, the less animals you buy on, if you're buying cows and calves at foot, then there's a chance that you buy on all the calf diseases as well as all the cow diseases. You know, so it's, it does require then a bit more logistics, because you've got to have a bull that you're happy putting on heifers, or use AI, which you know.
That's it. No, thanks, Joe. So coming back to you, Mark, since you've recently changed your heifer replacement policy and now breed your own heifers, can you just tell us why you decided to make that change?
Yeah, I mean, the decision in the end was relatively straightforward. It was a combination of the lack of availability of the right sort of animals that we wanted, and combined with the experience with TB and trying to find a way of shutting down possible routes for it back onto the farm. And one of the most obvious routes was through buying in the problem. As I say, I still don't know whether I bought it in or not, but it was an easy way of reducing that risk considerably by breeding our own replacements on farm, so that we have more control over the stock that we were running. There's obvious drawbacks to that as well, in the fact that the animals that I will be breeding from would have been much higher value than the animals that I was buying in as replacements previously. But that's part of the challenge of managing the change and the switch to breeding your own.
That's it. That's it. And another factor was that you noticed there was a change in market demand as well. So the processors weren't wanting these big bulls. Can you just touch on that a bit more?
Sure. Yeah. The signs from the abattoirs for a while have been towards smaller, more consistent grading animals. Now, to my mind, if they're going to make signs, they ought to be paying for the signs and encouraging the producers to produce what they want by paying more for the animals they want. Unfortunately, we're not in an industry like that. Instead, they go the other way and they penalise what they don't want. So we've come from a situation where, with a blonde Aquitaine Hereford Friesian calf or bull, which we could get to 440 kilos and hit a U+ grade, which will be a significant premium at the abattoir. We're back down now to a maximum weight of 420 kilos. And if we hit 410 as a carcass weight, so that we're not getting over that and being penalised, generally we've come back a grade. So we're back to a U equals or a U minus. So we're losing money two ways. We're losing weight and we're also losing confirmation. The message from the industry generally has been that that top weight might come back further. And knowing how long the production cycle is, I took the view that we will be better looking to try and achieve a carcass with value that finished quicker and potentially at a slightly lighter weight as well. And that's one of the reasons that we moved back towards a more beef type animal rather than the dairy cross type animals, the dam. Yeah.
And can I just ask you about how you sourced your heifers and where you came into problems with that? Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. We haven't had too many problems sourcing heifers in the sense that I found the farm and then bought the cattle. I found the farm based on the health status of the farm and knowing the individual who was farming it or the family, and also sharing a vet with them. So the decision. We've got stabilizer cross cows on the farm now. I'm not a stabilizer fan necessarily. It was more important that we had the right cows with the right health status than it was necessarily that we had the right breed on the farm. So my aim was to get away from a Hereford Friesian, which routinely would weigh between 750 and 850 kilos live, and get down to more of a 650 kilo type cow. A 650 kilo cow versus a 750 kilo cow requires about 10% less energy to live. So I can either carry more cows or I can use some of the grassland that I've got to grow more crops. It opens up a few more options with a smaller animal. So that was one of the reasons that we looked at sourcing from a single unit. It also meant we could bring in animals which were consistent in terms of the health status, and we could move them direct to farm rather than going through a collection centre or anything else.
And Joe, if you can't buy direct, how can you buy safely from the market or from a dealer? What are the things you should be looking for?
Yeah, so that it is, I think personally, from a disease point of view, the fewer places you buy from, if you do buy in your heifers, try and buy them all from one person, and ideally that person year on year, so you're not changing people every year as well. So the fewer places you buy it in from, the better. And I do think there's probably a bit of room in this country for people, some farms, to breed. That is their job, is to produce female replacements for other people, and the steer is the byproduct, rather than, we seem to always put a lot of emphasis on the terminal traits of our cattle, and be thinking that the fat bullock or the fat bull is the real thing, and the heifer might be a byproduct. I think there's real scope for improving the maternal size of our herds, which actually I think have a much bigger effect on our profitability than straight out growth rate. And so you know, going to someone and saying, right, I want like 15 heifers for the next this year and the next 3 years, and I think that really minimises your thing. It's quite hard to go to a mart and do that unless you buy all the cattle from one farm, and the temptation is then that you can get a nice even pen of 15 heifers, but they might have come from 6 different farms, and they're range in age from 18 months to 36 months, and that massively increases the chance of different diseases and stuff. And some of the diseases like Johne's, really you can't test the individual animals. They have to come off herds that are testing all their cows. BVD, you can test the individual animals, but not as I say, the likes of Johne's and stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And just to touch on what you said about the importance of the maternal traits, I recently did a Nuffield scholarship and found that in the suckler herd, those maternal traits are worth 5 times that of terminal traits. So we really need to keep focusing on those. Emma, can I just bring you in and check if there's any questions?
Yeah, less of questions, more of comments, but I think we can turn one of these comments around and ask our speakers. I think if we could ask the audience, we would, but unfortunately, to be able to do that, we need to have loaded it in advance. So the comment kind of is, I wonder what percentage of the people listening do all of the health protocols for bought-in heifers that we've spoken about. So Mark, I'll come to you first, and from your perspective, from kind of the people you talk to within the industry, if you had to take a punt, what do you think it would be?
I'm not hanging myself out like that. Good grief. Look, in terms of our own herd, we test for BVD. We test, having had BVD 20 years ago and a mild brush with it compared with some people. We've been testing for that ever since, and also vaccinating. And I wouldn't run a herd of any sort without doing that myself now. We're now testing for Johne's as well, and that is an annual test which has picked up a few animals which have been candidates for trouble. So those have left, and we are in the process of looking at what other health protocols we can put in place. We are vaccinating calves at weaning, for example, and things like that. So we're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of what Joe has talked about in terms of the problems that might be encountered buying in animals, we've either encountered some of them, had brushes with them, or as yet haven't spotted them, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily not there. The wider industry, my gut feeling is that a lot of people are becoming a lot more aware of BVD now than they were previously. And it's the one thing that if we could get rid of it from the national herd, the benefits would be absolutely immense. It has a massive negative impact on all sorts of different things, not only through conception and things like that, but also potentially on finishing animals in a pen. If you've got a PI running around with a load of healthy animals, it affects all of those finishing animals as well. So I've got a pet hate of BVD and would love to see that disappear. In terms of testing for other stuff within the beef herd in my area, with the Midlands, I would hazard a guess that a lot of people are in a similar situation to us, that they're either just learning about these sort of things, becoming more switched on to them, or beginning to test, or haven't engaged yet. I don't think there are a huge number of herds in this area who could put their hand on the heart and say they are either doing everything they can or that there isn't more they could do. Certainly we're not in that situation.
I'm glad you answered that. Oh, sorry. I'm glad you answered that question. Go on, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in terms of people buying bulls, I think there's a much higher take-up of bull breeders in the health schemes. And when you go to the marts to buy a bull, they do have the health declarations there that they've been tested for BVD, that the latest Yonis test is such and such status. And that's what I'd like to see much more of on the heifer production side, but there's not a huge amount. Yeah.
I was going to say before, Mark, I'm glad you answered that question, because the asker of the question dropped a message in, which is why I was laughing, that said stop sitting on the fence. Joe, just from your perspective then, Joe, from the veterinary side, what would you, if you had to take a punt of what percentage of people were doing it?
Yeah, so the vast majority of our farms I deal with in this part of the world breed their own heifer replacements, so they're just buying in bulls, and we really encourage them to buy off known health status, so that immediately cuts out a lot of the testing. If it comes BVD tested already, then that's better than having to test it when you get there and then finding 2 weeks later, oh, sugar, it's got a problem. So some of these things can be, so if you're buying a non-virgin bull that's in the health scheme for Yonis and BVD, and it's from a TB4 yearly testing parish, you've automatically cut out a lot of the diseases.
And are many of your herds testing for Yonis, Joe?
Yeah, I think about 70% of them. So the Yonis testing, as Mark says, is it's not that onerous. Just blood testing all the breeding animals once a year that are over 2, and it pays for itself quite easily, because most herds will have some Yonis. You only need to find, it costs roughly, this is sort of figures I have put on the back of bag packets for farmers, about eight quid a cow to test for Yonis, for the lab work, the vet time to take the blood, the vet tube, posting it off and stuff. So to test 100 cows costs about 800 quid. If you find 1% positive, that's a fat cow that you can send away and hopefully get 800 quid for, as opposed to finding out in a year's time and she's gone to a bag of bones and paying the naff man 50 quid to take her away. And meantime, she might have spread Yonis to a load more heifer calves that you're going to come up into the herd. So it pretty much does, and especially now, obviously the price of culled cows is even better. It'd be £1,000.
Yeah,
it really does pay for itself, and it's only through that you can reduce the incidence in the herd.
and if one of your in-calf cows tests positive for Yonis, how would you manage her at calving to reduce the risk of it passing on?
So nearly always we're testing cows when they are pregnant, because we tend, beef cows don't come through the stocks very often. So we either do a fair bit of PDing time or pre-calving time. And so, yeah, the important thing is that they're taken out of the group. So they're not putting Yonis into the calving pen environment, because young calves are much more likely to pick up Yonis. And so if you take them out of that, then you're removing that disease challenge. So they've got to be calved in a separate building or separate fields and kept separate. So normally calve them separate, put a creep in, wean them early and get them away, hopefully before they started to. Generally, the blood test is like an early warning system. It won't pick them up if they're going to go down with Yonis in 5 years' time, but it gives you an idea. If you're testing, you shouldn't have any go down within the year, so you can still get them away from
that. And then we just had another comment come in, but I think it's a really valid one, that says, as a purchaser, you should check what high health actually means to your vendor, because the term is increasingly bandied around and it doesn't always correlate with the check scheme. And Joey's
But
agreeing with that
very
one.
much agree. We've had instances with people who said, "Oh, buying these, they're high health," and actually we've asked either them or their agent to go back and actually, what is their yoni status? Unknown. What is their BVD status? Unknown. And they're just high health because they've written high health, not actually no health scheme has been a part of.
Brilliant, thank you. And then one more question: what would you do with a heifer with warts on teats?
Who's that to Joe?
Yeah, so there's
Sorry,
a number of options. Depends what stage of production is. Some of them will just self-cure and come off themselves. You know, that's I mean, you can remove them either surgically. You can make autogenous vaccines. You can remove them, make a vaccine, send it off, and inject them. But I think a lot of them will either come off themselves or put a dab of local in and a rubber ring on. Sometimes I've frozen them off with the cryosurgery stuff.
What causes them, Joe?
So it's papillomavirus. So that is another disease you can bring on, but most herds will have it. It's normally pretty incidental. It's not a big problem.
Our own experience with it when we've had cows with warty teats is to make a note of it at calving, and then look again next year and discover they've gone. So you know, I haven't gone to the effort of removing them or doing anything about them. I've made sure the calf can suck and that the calf is actually getting fed and everything else, and then we've turned them out to grass and left them to it.
Yeah, I think the vast majority will cure themselves.
Brilliant, thank you. That was all from me.
Thanks, Emma. So we're now going to move on to talk about breeding our own replacements. So again, it'd be good to bring the guys listening tonight in. Can you just complete this poll telling us what age you calve your heifers at if you're breeding your own? Emma, are you okay to bring it up?
Yep, so that's launched, and the question is, at what age do you aim to calve your heifers? Is it 2 years, 2.5, or 3? And again, that's just one answer that you can select and just click in the box.
Thanks, Emma.
So we're at about 65% voted. So just the last few get them in and then we'll close it.
Great. And I promise this is the final poll.
Right, I'll close that now. So the results are 2 years, 71%, 2.5 years, 21%, and 7% going at 3 years.
Wow, that's brilliant.
There's nothing like
That's
preaching
brilliant.
to the converted.
I know. That's it. No, that's great. Because Mark, you now calve your home-bred heifers at 2, don't you?
Yeah, we're aiming for between 22 and 24 months, really. I really want my heifers calving in the main calving block, because otherwise we're just stretching the calving pattern out and making more work for ourselves. So my idea at the moment is that heifers born in the first cycle of calving, first 21 days, will become candidates for replacements. Heifers born in the second cycle will have to have something about them which makes me want them, and heifers in the third, fourth cycles, if there are third and fourth cycles, won't be there, won't enter the breeding herd. So I've got to keep the animals that I'm going to breed from as early in the pattern as possible to make sure they're as mature as possible when they go to the bull, and yeah, we'll aim to calve between 22 and 24 months as a result.
Yeah, no, that's great. And research supports that you know, heifers which are born within the first 3 weeks of the calving period go on to be more productive cows and last longer as well. So yeah, that's really great. And how much extra management is it to calve them at 2? Is it a pain or does it work well?
Well, we've never had any issues calving cows at any age. So
Yeah.
I think that, you know, we're not very good at grazing grass. We are quite good at calving cows. So I don't worry about calving them. The one learning curve this year is just how dominant the Hereford Friesians have been within the herd versus the stabilizer cross cows that we've got in the herd, and in particular the heifers. So we've lost probably too much condition over Christmas and over winter when we've been housed. We aim to house just before Christmas, about 23rd of December, and then be turning out by, well, as soon as they calve. So we're only indoors for 3 months, but we did see quite a drop in condition, and that is something which I'm going to pay more attention to going forwards. But it didn't create any calving problems. You know, the problems we've had have been from the incorrect bull choice. If we've had a bull that is not easy calving, and also from fat cows, so body condition score.
And do you find it difficult to get those heifers back in calf that have calved for the first time? Because I know some producers find that quite tricky. How do you manage those heifers to ensure that they conceive quickly?
Okay, so when we were running Hereford Friesians with the same system, it was very much a case of if they could hack the system and they could stay in the herd, then they stayed in the herd, and if they couldn't, they went. Obviously, in this system, the more animals we lose as a first calver, and the associated price drop or value drop of those animals versus them being finished heifers, the more money we're going to lose. So it's become much more important to retain those animals within the herd and get them back in calf. So the biggest difference I've seen at the moment is that we're in the second year of having any real number of heifers that have calved in the herd. And so they're second calvers now. And those second calvers have had a, where are we? Got it on my list somewhere, an average gestation length of 343 days. So well below 365 days. So it's doable.
Yeah.
And the Hereford Friesian Cross Blonde, that was averaging 361 days for the animals that stayed in the herd that I've actually got figures for. And obviously the animals that didn't stay in the herd disappeared. So that's a manipulated figure, if you like. But yeah, the gestation length of the bull is the absolutely crucial factor. By having a short gestation length bull, which is giving us light birth weights, but we're having an easy calving, which doesn't put too much pressure on the heifer in the first instance. It allows quicker recovery. We're using pain relief if we have to assist in any way, shape or form with the calving as well to try and ease the recovery in that sense. And then we're making sure that when they go outside, they hit some decent grass and they can push on, not only to feed the calf, but also to grow themselves and start cycling again. But it is very doable in my view, as long as you're making the right management choices, which is generally gestation length and ensuring that the heifers are in the right condition at calving, so they're not having calving problems themselves.
Yeah. And Joe, is that something that you would recommend giving pain relief to cows you're having to assist?
Yeah, I think if there's bruising and things there, it really slows down the time that they'll come cycling for the first time. So by giving them painkillers, I think it not only means they take more interest in the calf, but they recover quicker. The other important thing to say is some people will try and negate poor calving genetics by having the cows too thin, try and starve them in the run up to calving. And generally what that can do is you're then dragging out big calves out of thin cows. But the condition the cow is, or the heifer is, particularly at the point of calving, that helps set when she will come bulling. And if she is too lean, even if you feed her tons after calving, she'll not come bulling very quickly. And she's only got that window to get back in calf. If you think that you want a calf every year, that she's pregnant for 9 months, she's got to get back in calf within the 3 months. And Mark's done brilliantly there if he's getting it calving to all 340 days. I think gestation length is really critical, not only for light birth weights and easier calving, but to try and get a cow to have a calf every year is like the cornerstone of profitable suckler production. And by having short gestation, there's big overlap between the breeds, but in general, natives and stabilizers have shorter gestations than continentals.
And does that nutrition affect colostrum quality as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the failure of passive transfer, yeah, if you're starving your cows in the run up to calving in an effort to reduce calf size, then what you'll do is you'll also restrict the amount of colostrum, so you'll make it more likely the calf will get scours or navel ill or what have you. And that can be tested with blood tests beforehand. You know, in terms of pre-calving nutrition, I think we talked about it before. It's setting the calf up really, you know, is pretty vital. And one of the things I would, you know, they've got to have enough energy and protein. And personally, I think they should be on a high mag mineral from 3 to 4 weeks pre-calving, and that will make the actual process of calving go a bit better.
All right. So what does that affect?
I think it helps increase the muscular tone of the uterus, and so you tend to get less slow calving. They tend to, when they start calving, they get on with it, calve, less sort of wandering around just with the tail up, not doing a huge amount. I think for some reason it seems to add to the more slop as well. We'll get more slip. Yeah.
Yes.
Quite a big fan of pre-calving high mag.
Yeah,
and a lot of the pre-calving buckets are high mag, but they also have extra selenium and iodine and stuff in like that, which help with calf figure as well.
So would you recommend then getting some of your cows blood tested?
Yeah,
just to check
if you haven't done it before, and certainly if you're on a silage-based ration, because silage varies so much, you know, field to field, bale to bale, year to year, you know, it's worth giving a check to see if where you are is where you think you are, because a lot of these suckler cows can actually, especially the beef bred ones, they can hold their condition pretty well even though you're feeding them absolute rubbish, and we've found that the cows can be in quite good condition, but they're actually in quite a bad negative energy status and a low protein status. It's a low protein that means that the colostrum's not very good. So sometimes it's supplementing the protein without giving them too much extra energy. You don't want to get too fat. You want to get protein.
Thanks, Joe. That's really interesting. Emma, are there some questions?
I just had a really time appropriate one then.
Oh, brilliant.
Has Joe found higher iodine has the same effect as high mag?
Yes and no. I mean, it's slightly different. Certainly, if you don't have enough iodine, then your actual calves, you can have slow calvers as well, but also you have calves that come out with a heartbeat and never breathe. And it's, I mean, the iodine is linked to selenium, as all these trace elements are. So if you don't have decent amounts of selenium, you can't absorb what iodine there is there. So you need to correct the selenium as well as the iodine. But you don't want to give too much iodine if you're unsure of your status and just think it's worthwhile giving them more iodine. Too much iodine blocks the colostrum uptake by the calf's gut. So again, it's worth checking, find out where you are and supplement appropriately. So like in Northumberland, a lot of farms are short in iodine, and it's pretty common to bolus them pre-calving.
And when
bolus pre-calving, the calf is born with much better levels of selenium and iodine, goes through the blood much better than it goes through milk.
And when would be a good time to take some bloods, Joe?
Yeah, so often we do that at about that 3 weeks pre-calving, 3 to 4 weeks pre-calving.
Okay.
So it's similar handling time to when they might be getting a scour vaccine or getting trace element bolus. It gives you time to put anything right. If you do it too far in advance, the calf's not drawing enough out of the cow anyway. You know, you can feed a mid-pregnancy cow can survive on some pretty moderate hay in a good view, but when it comes to close to calving, it's more critical.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll let you carry on, Sarah, and come back to me when you want me.
Thanks, Emma. Lovely. So just going back then, Mark, to your heifers. So these are some of your stabilizer cross heifers on screen now that you've bred yourself. What was your?
Sorry, these are some of the heifers that I've bought in as replacements into the herd, and so they will form the basis of my herd going forwards.
Do you want to just talk about where you sourced these from then, and how you decided these were the ones that you were going to go for?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted a mature cow size of about 650 kilos. So things like black baldies, which is a Hereford Cross Angus, would have been ideal. I've had a bit of a thing about those for a long time. I would love some of those, but there weren't any locally that I was aware of. Some of the other native breeds, I didn't want to go down the route of anything too pure because I wanted to maintain some hybrid vigor. And I didn't want anything which was going to become too niche for marketing, because I'm a commercial producer, and what hangs on the hook at the end of the day is what pays me and makes my money. So it was trying to find something that sat almost between the traditional native breeds and something that sat between where I was with my previous herd. I'm not saying the stabilizer fits that bill necessarily better than anything else. As I say, the black baldies and plenty of other crosses can do the job just as well. But that's where we were heading. That's the sort of animal we were looking for. And we got to know a local farmer who was running a herd with better health status than us, in terms of they knew more about their health status than we did. And they were also paying a lot more attention to the maternal traits than we had been doing in the past as well. And as I say, we share a vet, so from that point of view, he was kind enough to let me talk to the vet about the situation on their farm, so I understood a lot more about what I was buying and potentially what we would end up with.
Brilliant. And other than mature cow size, what are the things you're looking for in your cows that make you think, oh yes, I'm going to breed my heifers from her?
Well, they've got to be docile. I'm not putting up with any animals on the farm that I don't like the look of. We're actually going to pay a lot more attention to that next year than we have done this year, because we're aware that this year I wouldn't say we've bred any problems, but we've got one or two animals which we have decided that won't be candidates for keeping cows from. And there's actually one or two that are going up the road as well based on their behaviour at calving time this year. Nobody's got hurt, nobody's been close to getting hurt, but I'm not taking the chance. So docility is probably my #1 criteria before anything else. I guess I'm looking for an average cow at the end of this. So I'm looking for an animal which doesn't have a massively wide pelvis, but doesn't have a really narrow pelvis. I'm guessing I'm looking for one that isn't really extreme in any way. And it's going to take time to learn how to do that, because I haven't done it before, and we're bound to make mistakes along the way. But that average cow is what we'll be looking to find amongst the replacements that we've got available to us.
Brill. And Mark, you touched on pelvic measuring there. Are you doing that before you're putting them in calf?
We haven't done yet, because this is the very first year that we've had enough enough heifers to actually start picking and choosing from.
Okay. So
that's a conversation I've still got to have with the vet. We will be doing it, because there is obviously a value to ensuring that we haven't got a calving problem that we're going to create. Yeah.
And Joe, is that something you'd recommend?
I think it's rule. The biggest reason for calving difficulties is the size of the calf. The next biggest reason is the size of the opening it's got to come out of. And so if you can weed out those few animals that have a disproportionately small pelvis, then you're heading problems off. And I'm all in favour of that. I think it fits in quite well, similar sort of time as we do AI, and we're doing uterus tract scoring, seeing if the heifers have passed puberty and how lumpy, bumpy their ovaries are and stuff like that, how likely candidates they are to take the AI. I think the other thing, when you're choosing heifers, the number of farms have done very successfully is actually choose more than you're going to need, but bull them for less time, so that they self-select the fertile ones. So if you're only needing 20 heifers, then put 26, 27 to the bull and just bull them for 2 cycles, and that will select the more fertile ones, which will have the advantage that they'll be calving at the start of calving, so you're more likely to get them back in calf as first calvers, which you've alluded to is tricky, but also weeds out the bad. Heifers should be able to get in calf in a couple of cycles, and by getting rid of those bad calving genetics, you're actually getting into a virtuous cycle of the heifers, calves produced out of fertile heifers are more likely to be fertile, and it all starts to work really quite well.
And like you say, it's not a total loss as well, because those barren heifers are young enough to be finished before they get to 30 months, so you can still sell them prime, and it's a win-win, really.
Exactly.
So just going back to you then, Mark. So we've said what makes a good cow. Now, what makes a good bull to breed your heifers from?
Well, calving is obviously going to be very high on the agenda with that.
Yeah.
As Joe said, that's got to be the first thing on the list, because if we're looking at very high birth weights, or we're looking at very large shouldered calves or something like that, which are going to cause problems for the heifers, we're just building problems into the system that don't need to be there. So to some extent, I guess we're looking at a bull that's got more maternal traits. That's going to be a problem for me potentially in the finishing building with bulls, with the males, because those calves aren't going to grade or grow potentially to the same size as something with more terminal traits, perhaps. Certainly, we're seeing at the moment the bulls that are coming through in the finishing shed, which have a more maternal sire, are finishing quite a lot lighter than the blondes, which isn't a surprise, but they're finishing quite a lot lighter than I would like them to finish. But if we have to make a compromise in order to achieve the replacements that we want, then that's a compromise we'll have to live with. In my herd, I've got 90 cows. I'm running 3 live bulls at the moment, stock bulls. My intention is to get to the point where we've got 1 maternal bull and 2, either a multi-purpose bull or a terminal sire, or 2 terminal sires, in terms of the type of genetics that we're looking at within the herd.
I think sorry to interrupt, we've had farms do a similar thing to you, and inevitably they end up having 3 maternal bulls, because they work out that it's more, they're producing so many more calves per area of farm. So their kilos of beef produced per farm actually goes up by having more of an emphasis on the maternal side of things. Yes, their pounds per finished steer or finished bull is less, but they have quite a few more of them. And so they have the idea they'll keep a terminal sire, but actually when you go through the figures, it's you're not gaining as much as you think. You know, obviously every farm's different, but I think a lot of what drives profitability is the output per area of farm.
Yeah, per hectare rather than per head. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Emma, is there a question?
Yeah, Mark, can you just clarify the breeds of bull you're using, please? Both for breeding your replacements, breeding what's going into the slaughter line, and putting on your heifers.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So at the moment, I've got 1 blonde Aquitaine bull on farm, which is obviously a terminal sire that's left over from the previous system. And he is being used on the Hereford Frisian cows, and also the larger stabilizer cows that are within the herd, who I definitely don't want to breed from. So some of those cows are pretty big girls. Then I've got a senior stabilizer bull who I bought as our first non-blonde bull. And I've got a junior stabilizer bull as well. Now, both of those at the moment are providing calves or options for replacement heifers. We haven't got through to the point where they've actually got through the finishing shed yet, because they haven't been on the farm long enough for that to take place. I've also got a few Simmental sired calves in the finishing shed, which are Simmental cross stabilizer, which are the result of AI. And actually those calves in the finishing shed look quite impressive. Yeah, it remains to be seen when they're on the hook just how well they do. But they are only a very small number of them, but they're quite impressive. I'm not wedded to the idea of any particular breed. It's finding a breed that works for us, and finding a breed that matches the criteria that we're looking to achieve, which is every cow getting back in calf the following year, and the heifers as well.
And do you choose a different bull for your heifers to your mature cows?
Yeah, I mean, the blonde Aquitaine bull that we've got is a big boy. He's quite old anyway, but we've run him for a number of years with heifer groups, and or rather with heifers in a group of cows, and consistently he has missed heifers within that group. So his conception rate on cows is very good. His conception rate on heifers is awful. So he avoids heifers at all costs. The stabilizer bulls, I've got one smaller bull, and I think he's going to, by the time he's fully grown, will be smaller than my senior stabilizer bull. So he will be the one that this year goes to the, in all likelihood, goes to the heifers. So I'm not, we're just coming out of calving at the moment. I haven't decided exactly how we're going to do all of this. But yeah, the stabilizer bulls will be the ones that produce the replacements going forwards, obviously.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that one.
Thanks, Emma. And have you found it easy to buy a bull with good maternal traits, Mark?
I'm not doing a stabilizer sales pitch now. So I don't want to go down the route of blowing their trumpet too much, because I don't have any any links with them or anything else. But they obviously are selling the breed as a maternal breed, as a breed with a lot of background information and a lot of data behind it. The problem I've got with the blondes is that the blonde breed appears to be reducing the amount of recording that's done, and that is making buying sires within the blonde breed harder. So I am very keen to look at sires which have got a lot of data behind them. You still obviously got to go and look and make sure it's got 4 legs and everything else. But you need to be looking at the data that is in the EBVs to understand where your bull sits within the breed and how it compares with others within that breed. You can't compare EBVs directly across breeds, but you know, it's a good starting point to start looking at the traits for calving ease and other maternal traits to understand how all that works. Now, as I say, we're pretty new to this. I'm used to looking at the terminal traits, going down the maternal route and understanding what the outcome is going to be from the choices we make will be proven over the years to come.
Yeah. And how important is milk to you as a maternal trait?
I used to think it was
the Frisian.
Yeah,
I was going to say the Frisian cross will have a lot of milk, whereas now I can imagine.
Yeah, it is important. You've got to have enough milk. I'm not sure how you easily assess how much milk you've got, because you know, at the end of the day, the calf's drinking it. And what we have noticed is that our the cows that are on farm now are a lot less sort of picky about who sucks. So we've now got calves within the herd that are sharing mothers quite regularly. We've seen that happening at 3 or 4 days old, and that is quite a contrast to where we were with the Hereford Frisians, who would belt anything that got within kicking distance. But yeah, so is milk important? Yes, it is. Obviously, the calf has got to have enough milk to grow. How do we assess it? I don't really know. Do we run the risk of making mistakes along the way? Then I guess we do. Yeah. I'm open to suggestions from Joe on how we deal with that, because I don't know what the answer is to that one.
Yeah, I think obviously if you're breeding your own placements, milk is absolutely fundamental. It's and you've got to have enough of it. But if you're coming from the base of the Hereford Frisian, I don't think it'd be an issue for the first generation cross off that, certainly, and probably the second. But yeah, ideally you want to be buying bulls in the positives for their milk, not the negatives. And there are some stabilizers, picking with that breed, that are really quite negative in the milk, which would be fine if you're just using them as the terminal side of things. You know, because in America they don't want a lot of milk on their cows, because they have too much milk on the cows. They run cows where we would run blackie sheep, you know, really quite moderate grazing. And if they milk too well, they'll lose too much fettle and not get back in calf, not survive the winter. So
Yeah,
there is a balance between having a fat cow and a tiny calf at weaning time, and having enough milk to, you know, hit your 300 kilo weaning weight or whatever it is.
That's it. So the final thing I wanted to touch on this evening is AI. So Mark, recently you've AI'd to some of your cows to produce some heifers. How has that gone, and what have you learned from it?
It didn't go very well at all. I don't really fully understand the reasons why. We've done it for 2 different years. We did it in the summer drought of, I think it was 2018. The synchronisation went well. The heifers were very calm. The AI process went very well. We scanned at 6 weeks post-service, and we at that point only had an in-calf rate of, I think it was 34% at that point. We then scanned again at 17 weeks, and it dropped to 27%. So we'd actually lost calves between scanning at 6 and actually scanning at 17. Now, I'm convinced in my own mind that a lot of the problem that year was the weather and the pressure that the cattle were under, but I don't know. We tried it again in 2019, tweaked the sync program, different bull, and this time we achieved a better conception rate of about 45%. Still far from ideal in my view. We'd actually tried AI on the Hereford Friesians quite a long time ago, and we'd hit anything between 65 and 55% over the 3 years that we did it. So we know we can do better.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's where we need to be aiming. If you to achieve a 12-week calving pattern, which is the bare minimum that we need to be hitting in my view on our farm, we've got to be hitting 65% conception at each service. If we don't do that, then we can't have a 12-week pattern. So
Okay.
it's, you know, that's where we've got to be aiming for with the AI. I need to improve the conception rates some way, and I also need to make it easier to manage, because, you know, it's a lot easier to put live bulls out to grass and let them get on with the job than it is to actually bring cattle in and synchronise them or to AI them. Especially when they've got calves at foot and they might be grazing on land which isn't adjacent to the buildings or the handling system. So yeah, that's something which
So why did you decide to have a go with AI? What influenced that decision?
Better genetics, and also I think my bulls are lazy. I'm not sort of impressed by their work rate really. If you've got I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this already, but if you've got a bull, on our farm we've got roughly 90 cows. The 12-week pattern is roughly 90 days. So each bull therefore has got to get a cow and calf every 3 days to achieve a 12-week pattern. You know, that's not working very hard, is it? If he's only working for 2 days a week and he's only doing that for 12 weeks, and the rest of the time he's getting in the way, it's not good enough. So that's why I want to get away from having the bulls on the farm. 9 months of the year they're in the way, they're costing to keep, they're expensive to buy, they're expensive to maintain, and potentially they're dangerous as well.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, yeah, I would much rather have a herd where I could use AI more routinely. If I could get rid of a stock bull, then I can have an extra cow, so I've got an extra unit of output, as well as not the cost of buying that bull in the first place. And you know, it would just be a nicer system to have, I think, but it's going to take time to actually tweak to get to the point where we can start removing a bull from the farm with confidence, knowing that we've actually got the conception rates right in the first place. I know it can be done, but we're doing it far better than we are.
And that's where Joe comes in. So how do we achieve good conception rates from AI, Joe?
Right, yeah, there's loads really to talk about there. And I think Mark's absolutely right. We want to be aiming for about 2/3 of main calf which is where AI can really score, because to get 2/3 of your cows or heifers in calf on day one of bulling, like there's no bull in the world will ever manage to do that. And that's what by syncing you'll do that, and so those calves on average will be that much heavier at weaning time because they're that much older, and that pays for the synchronization cost quite easily, notwithstanding the being able to choose semen from all around the world, you know, unrelated to your bulls, etc., etc. So I think it is a good thing. At heifers it's quite easy to do anyway, because you're not having to bother about shedding calves off as they're coming up the, you know, handling and stuff like that. So about 40% of our herds in the practice will use some AI, and the biggest majority is on the heifers. So the things to make sure is they're getting enough food, enough energy, and Mark's alluded to, like drought is a bad news. you can have all the trace elements in the world, but if they're not physically getting enough energy because the food's not in front of them, then you're not going to get a good conception rate. And they need to be in good body condition as well. And we, in the practice, we will do uterus tract scoring to check that they're cycling hard enough and suitable candidates to be put through to AI. And at the same time, we'll often do the pellet measuring, and you can quite often get a good idea. It's normally a week or two beforehand, before they go to the bull, so they're normally getting their BVD vaccines or lepto vaccines, IVR vaccines, getting a trace element bolus, because most of our farms know their trace element status and know the need to use boluses to correct that while they're at grass, and then knowing that every animal is getting that as opposed to relying on buckets. And by doing all these things, and also knowing, so they've got on top of reducing the impact of the various diseases, then yeah, most of the time, I think when Jack last did an audit, we averaged 71% conception in heifers and 69% in cows across the practice.
Gosh, that's really good, really good. And with synchronisation, does that impact conception rates?
Yeah, I mean, we do pretty much only synchronisation for our beef. You know, farmers are busy people, and you know, that sort of time they're thinking about making silage or clipping sheep or what have you, trying to keep an eye on what cow's bulling and then getting her into the shed. You know, it's just not really that practical for spring calving herds. And so we'll pretty much exclusively do sync programs. So the sync program, we use the heifers through the stocks 3 times, once to get some device, once to get pulled out and injected, and once to be AI'd. Because we're finding that it's a big barrier. We used to use the heifer came through the stocks 5 times. That was a big barrier for farmers taking up AI because it's so much more work and they're so busy.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'll hand over to Emma now for the final questions.
Yeah, there's just a couple of questions coming through on what you were talking about then. And would you expect a higher conception rate serving to a natural heat, Joe?
I think it's pretty similar, really. You know, about that 65-70%. The problem with natural heat is, in theory, it should be better, but actually in practice, getting the cow in without stressing her on her own and getting an AI man to come when you want to come, it all has an impact. So
Okay.
I think natural heats are quite tricky in beef cows.
And there was a comment on that as well. Do you think heat collars are similar, or any good to AI to a natural heat?
Yeah, I think if you've got those technologies and the pedometers and stuff like that, they do work well. But you've still then got the work that every day you're going to be pulling in 2 or 3 heifers to get them inseminated, not even at the same time in the day. So your phone will text, you've got a heifer coming on to heat 6 in the morning. You might then get another one at 11 midday. When do you get the AI man? If you get him that afternoon for your 6 in the morning heifer, then it's probably going to be a bit quick for the one that came bulling just at dinner time. So it's I think synchro is the way ahead, really, for suckler animals. For obviously dairy cows are coming through the shed twice a day, or what have you, not shed, what's it called, parlour, twice a day, then it works a lot better.
Yeah, and there was just a bit of a reminder that came through as well, that when we're talking about conception rates, I guess we have to remember that some AI technicians are better than others as well. So there's that factor in there too. Sarah, was there anything else on AI and heat that you wanted to cover at the moment? There's a few other questions that we've got.
I don't think so. So. Just fire away with the questions.
Okay, so Mark, do you wean your first calvers earlier than the older cow groups?
No, we tend to scan everything in the first week of September, so that's after the arable harvest and it's before drilling starts. And at the moment, our annual TB test tends to fall as well in the September-October period. So we will weigh everything as they come through for scanning. We may wean some of them at that point. We're tending to use the quiet wean nose tags for weaning. so that we've got a more relaxed weaning experience for the calves. We don't get the noise with them. But you can't, well, we can't at the moment do all of the calves in one go like that. So we tend to wean one group as they come through for scanning, and then we'll wean the second group perhaps when we come through for TB testing later in the autumn. But no, we're not. I'm keen to avoid giving the heifers any preferential treatment if I can, purely because preferential treatment tends, in my view, to equal work, and I'm lazy and I want it to be easy. So it's about trying to keep the system as simple as I can do. And because I forget, I'm rubbish at planning stuff. I'm rubbish at doing stuff when I'm meant to do it. If I can do it all in one go, I'm much more efficient than if I have to start trying to, build it into other things.
And how many heifers are you typically retaining as a percentage of the whole herd?
I'm not sure yet. It's going to be, this year is our first year drawing from our own heifers. So the plan is to work out how many culls we got to start with, and we've got some Hereford Friesians going out with other problems. We lost one cow that went down at calving after she had twins, and we had issues with her. So I'm expecting to lose through the cull group and the dead cow around 10. We will lose half a dozen to 10, let's say 6 at scanning time that are empty. Hopefully it won't be that many, but if we do, then we've got to cover those as well. So I'm now up to 16-ish, I guess. So my intention will probably be to put 20 to 25 to the bull, possibly give them one cycle. That's my temptation at the moment. Although I guess if I don't catch enough, I'm going to regret it. But yeah, I want to, this year where I'm going to need flexibility of management because of the grass situation, and in-calf heifers are obviously going to be a lot easier to shove about around the farm chasing grass or whatever than cows with calves at foot. So they need to become mobile and relatively quickly. So my intention is that they won't be with bull for too long.
Yeah. And then the final question we've just had come through, which we spoke a little bit about how, because you're putting the stabilizer bull on, you're losing a bit of conformation and a bit of weight. How much income do you think you're losing because of that?
This year, it's going to be very noticeable in terms of the income that comes off the kill sheets, isn't it? We're going from a blonde Aquitaine carcass off a Hereford Friesian, which this year, in previous years has averaged, I've got the number here somewhere, 370 kilos, down to something which this year off the stabilizers is going to average near 320. So we're looking at a 50 kilo drop at £4 a kilo, which is going to be 200 quid. But I can keep more stabilizer cows to increase my output by having smaller cows. So I can increase the herd numbers potentially, or decrease the grazing area to improve performance that way. And I'm hoping that if we can actually get to a situation where the replacement heifers are taking a much smaller proportion of my income because I'm not using as many of them, because I increase cow longevity, I will have more heifers to sell the other end as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, I'll hand back if you wanted to wrap up.
Great, thanks, Emma.
Just before that,
sorry.
The other thing is that that extra 50 kilos of live weight might be, it might cost you a lot less to get there, i.e. they might be physically more feed efficient to, they eat less kilos of corn to generate kilos of beef.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember with this that we've got cattle here which are maternal sired, and as we move through to hopefully being better at understanding how the genetics work, we can perhaps improve the carcass weight other ways through better choice of animals. Yeah, I mean, those calves have gone out a month earlier than the blondes have gone, so they've eaten a month less food. So yes, there is a difference in terms of that. My fixed costs are the same, but certainly my feed costs are significantly less.
Brilliant, thank you. So just what I wanted to finish with was just to summarise the advantages of both buying in replacement heifers and breeding your own. So these are summarised on the slide on screen now. So just to run through the advantages of breeding your own, you know their breeding history and their health, and you have a lot of control over the genetics as well. As I said, there's no risk of buying in any health problems as long as you're checking the health status of those bulls that you're buying. And also those heifers are managed to your own protocol as well, so you have a lot of control about how they're developed. The advantages of purchasing heifers is you can keep more cow numbers because you don't have those additional groups of heifers to manage. It's a much simpler system. You can just run those terminal bulls as Mark did in the past. As I said, you've got less groups of cattle to manage, and research in Ireland actually showed it's cheaper to buy in heifers than it is to breed your own. So there is some saving there. So just to finish, I just wanted to highlight some of the resources that we have available. A manual to particularly look at is this one shown on the right, which is breeding, selecting and managing beef replacement heifers, which has a lot of information that's been covered in tonight's webinar. We also have a number of webinars and videos on our YouTube channel. This was quite an interesting one here, looking at how they manage heifers in Nebraska. So you can watch any of those at your leisure. This webinar has also been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days. So if you want to watch it back, you can do. So finally, it's my job to bring the meeting to a close. I'd firstly like to thank our speakers for their input into tonight's very informative meeting. So a big thank you to Mark and to Joe. Also, thank you to my colleague Emma for assisting me tonight, ensuring that there was no technical glitches and your questions were answered fully. Finally, a big thank you to everyone who has been listening. I really hope you've enjoyed the discussion. When the webinar ends, you will be taken to a survey. So if you've got the time, please do fill that in and provide us with feedback. It really helps us tailor these events to your needs. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your evening.